So what we did in lesson 2 was we talked about, if we're looking at the map, we've covered the founding of Virginia, Maryland, the Carolinas, and Georgia. And I've told you before, I like to teach the settlement of the colonies in a regional sense. So we covered those in lesson 2. What we're dealing with in this lesson, we're going to deal with New England and the Middle Atlantic in this lesson. All right. So we really have to go back to the Protestant Reformation to understand how we get here. So the Protestant Reformation produces Puritanism. This is led by Martin Luther. In 1517, German theologian and priest Martin Luther nailed the 95 Theses to the front door of Wittenberg Cathedral. And what he does is he pretty much lays out all the problems that he has with the Roman Catholic Church. Clearly, I'm not going to cover all 95 here, teaching, obviously, American history, but I do have to get into a little theology today. I don't have time to go in depth on this. But what I do want you to look at is just some of Luther's theory here that challenged the church and led to a massive splinter movement of Protestant denominations throughout Europe and beyond. So Luther believed the Bible alone was the source of God's word, not the Bible, the church, and the Pope, right? Which is the Roman Catholic Church essentially believed that the Pope was the word of God on earth. Luther rejects that. So that's a big no-no with the Catholics. People are saved simply by faith in Christ alone, not by faith, good work, and indulgences, which this means like tribute. We often refer to this as what? You could pay this to absolve your sins. Tithes or good. Penance. You ever heard that word? Tithes or penance. Okay? Another thing that Luther is not big on is this idea of the divine right. Okay? And that is like all of these monarchs in Europe are ruling because it was the divinity of God. So that's going to be a challenge. That's not just a challenge to the church, that's the challenge it's a challenge to monarchical rule. And this is going to ultimately lead to another movement that you brought up earlier, which would be the Calvinist movement. All right? So Luther and his followers, the Lutherans actually ended up keeping a lot of the rites and ceremonies of the Catholic Church. It's a similar thing to what the Anglicans did in the Episcopal Church. I believe I mentioned to you all before, if you were to go to a Catholic wedding or a Catholic Mass or a Catholic funeral, you would see a lot of similarities in an Episcopal or a Lutheran wedding service or even funeral. Really, any of those types of services have similar ritual. They don't totally get rid of them. What Luther's going to do less than 20 years later is inspire a French theologian by the name of John Calvin to take this movement and these ideas a step further. Am I moving too fast or is everybody good? Okay, cool. So on the left, we have Martin Luther. On the right here, we have the commemorative doors at Wittenberg Cathedral. Any questions up to this point about Martin Luther? Am I jogging a few memories out there? Learning about this guy? Yeah. Now we move to John Calvin, and the Protestant Reformation. Calvin preached Calvinism, which stressed predestination. The premise of this is God is all-knowing, which Luther believed in as well. God is all-knowing, therefore, the minute someone is born, God is determined that they are either going to heaven or hell, because God is all-knowing. This is pretty extreme. It's a bit radical, right? So Calvin lays out his doctrine in the 1536 document entitled Institutes of the Christian Religion. Now all of these thoughts and theories get Calvin into some deep waters. Because at this period of time, what's the established religion in France? Catholicism. Good. So Calvin actually winds up in exile for a time in Switzerland. All right? And this is going to be published in Geneva. Here are some of the principles of the Institutes of Christian Religion. All humans are weak and wicked. Only the predestined go to heaven no matter what. Bless you. Christians must lead sanctified lives and live as visible saints. And I'll explain that here momentarily. Followers are expected to seek conversions or signs that they're predestined. Again, this goes back to the all-knowing, God being the all-knowing like this idea in his theology, if God is all-knowing, then predestination is inevitable. Here's where it's a little tricky, right? This means that everybody in the congregation has to always be doing good works to be a visible saint, right? And this creates problems. Like, we're going to deal with this when we get deeper into colonial America. Give me an example of an event that happens in Massachusetts in the late 1600s. Yeah, the Salem witch trials truly puts this to the test. Question?
Didn't this religion cause people to be like, going in front of an minority protesting that it doesn't matter?
Totally. Especially in America. Because people are going to get over here and you're going to deal with all of the societal problems that go beyond religion. And people are like, nah, I'm good. If I'm going to hell, why am I continuing to try? Okay? I'm glad you brought that up. All right. So, Calvin, this idea of like visible sainthood is going to lead to this like work ethic of like working from dusk till dawn. One of the proverbs that this group of Calvinists will live by, idle hands are the devil's workshop. This is also going to interweave into the American psyche and our society, this sort of idea of Protestant work ethic. It doesn't really matter what religion you are, this sort of idea of Protestant work ethic has always kind of remained in place. That it's just the constant grind, trying to achieve visible sainthood, even if you're not a Puritan or a Protestant, okay? What's also interesting is that these Calvinists are not just Puritans or Congregationalists. These Calvinists are also French Huguenots. And where do a large number of them wind up? Well, no, they leave France because they're rejecting the Catholics. Yeah. Where in America? Here. Right? And where else? Where else? Close. A little farther north. A lot of the French. New York. A lot. But they actually started. No, they started settling in New York when it was New Amsterdam, under the Dutch, because the Dutch allowed for religious freedom. Virginia allows for religious freedom too. That's why there are decent numbers, large numbers of French Huguenots wind up in both colonial New Amsterdam, ultimately New York, and colonial Virginia. This will be the same situation for Jewish settlers coming over during colonial period and the post-colonial period. So this Calvinist doctrine, though, is going to create a massive just splinter movement in England. And we're going to talk a bit about that here momentarily. Any other questions? What's up?
Were those the Calvinists versus the Huguenots? Like, what was the...
No. That group is going to, those Congregationalist Puritans in England, they want to take down the Anglican Church. Yeah. All right. Interestingly enough, the first French Huguenot attempt at settlement was actually in Florida. And they established Fort Caroline, and the Spanish burned it to the ground, mistakenly thinking they were Lutherans, and killing just about all of them. On the left, we have John Calvin. On the right are the institutes of the Christian religion. Okay, so we talked about Henry VIII in lesson 2. Henry VIII is going to break from the Roman Catholic Church for a lot of personal and political reasons. And pretty much he's the head of the Anglican Church. But again, a lot of the same ritual and rite. The Anglican Church basically establishes a set of bishops that are kind of like that are underneath the Pope. A little bit higher than priests. They are priests, but they are elevated higher than just a regular priest. Below the Pope, bishops, cardinals, thank you. It's kind of like a cardinal system, okay? So they're going to keep that type of system. Good job, guys. They're going to keep that in place. So when the Anglicans, right, are still remaining quasi-Catholic, this group of Calvinists in England, who are inspired by John Calvin, start to call themselves either Congregationalists or Puritans, because they believe they need to purify the Anglican Church of England. But I want you all to understand we have two flavors. I'm going to divide the room in half real quick. You guys over here, you're going to be the separatist, Congregationalist pilgrims, and you guys over here are going to be the Reformist Puritans, Congregationalist, Reformist Puritans. You guys don't want to start a holy war over here to my left. You all just want to move on and live your lives. You all over here, you're about to burn down the village. And that burning down of the village is going to ultimately lead to the English Civil War. All right? This group packs up their stuff and they leave and they go to Holland. But it doesn't work out because there's problems. Even though Holland or the Netherlands allow for religious freedom, this group over here is facing other issues. They're having a hard time buying land. They're having a very difficult time getting jobs. They're having a difficult time trading with anyone. They're being harassed for their religion. And they're also having children. And those children are becoming Dutch. And they don't like that. Okay? And I was talking about this earlier today. It's kind of like when you have family who's immigrated to America in the last 2-3 generations or even longer, but they don't want to lose their cultural identity. You know where I'm going with this? They want to keep their cultural identity and they want to hand that down to their children. That's what's happening here. So this group over here decides we're going to roll the dice and try to go to the New World. But this group over here, the Reformists, the Puritan Reformists, they are going to be the other half of the English Civil War, led by Cromwell. That's where all this kind of comes together. That's kind of like what is a little surprising. I know that you guys have like so much content to cover last year, but it is kind of interesting that the English Civil War is just kind of like a bit of a blip on the radar. Because it's such a pivotal event. It's connected to so many, like religion and monarchical rule and colonization and all this stuff. All right, so now we move on with our pilgrims, okay? This is Puritans in England, very simplistic lives, direct interpretation of the Bible, predestination, all that. So the Pilgrims tried to make it in Holland for about a little over a decade. Things were not going well for them. It wasn't just about the religious aspect of it, it was about the problem of survival, as well as the issue with their children. So just about 4 years prior to the collapse of the Virginia Company of London, the Pilgrims are going to appeal to the Joint Stock Company, and we already know they're on hard times, right? That Joint Stock Company's falling apart. King James is more than happy to have these religious dissidents leave England and go to the New World. It's kind of a win-win for him, right? They'll go and potentially settle, and it'll work out, and then they'll be out of his hair. Or if it doesn't work out, whatever. Okay, so they're going to get a land grant through the Virginia Company of London. But guys, I want you to check this out. This here, this is the land grant. That's the Virginia Company of London land grant from pretty much New York to North Carolina, dipping into North Carolina. So they're not going to settle on the Chesapeake. It wouldn't make any sense. Why would they come to Jamestown? Jamestown is predominantly or almost exclusively Anglican. So they're going to try to head in a different direction. They're going to move farther north. This is one of the most historically, sort of debated issues of early colonial America. Did they go north above the charter on purpose to get outside of the charter, or was it just an accident? Because we already know that Cape Cod had been explored before they arrived. We've learned about two of the people that explored it. One we know really well and one we just learned about. The guy we know really well that already explored it was John Smith, and the other guy that we just learned about was Bartholomew Gosnell. So they knew that there was an inlet that was teeming with fish, but it wasn't like they were super happy about where they landed. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. They couldn't have chosen a worse time to come over. They left in September and arrived in December. Why is that a problem? It's winter. They can't grow anything, right? There's also another problem here. They can't grow anything. And has anybody been to New England in the winter before? Yeah. It's freezing. All right? And this winter of 2021 was particularly brutal. Before they ever got off the ship, they're going to sign the Mayflower Compact. About half the ship were made up of Anglicans. Half the ship were made up of Pilgrims. They had a bunch of kids on board. What's remarkable is they only lost one person on the trip over, compared to the Jamestown crew who lost over 40 on the initial trip. There's actually a child born on the trip named Oceanus Hopkins, but sadly he died at 7 due to disease. So like I said, less than half of the Pilgrims on the Mayflower were actually separatists they called the Anglican Strangers. So, in reality, they're a group of squatters. The Mayflower Compact is not only their constitution for law and order, but it also shows their loyalty to England. Because if England really wanted to come and deal with them, since they've settled outside the charter, England could have brought a group of soldiers over, had them tried and executed, because they could have been deemed what? Traitors. Okay? So that's a big part of why the Mayflower Compact was signed. All the males on board, not the children, but the males on board that were not servants, took part in signing the Mayflower Compact. So this on the left is the Mayflower. This is the settlement here. Another interesting factor here is when they arrive, it seems and feels quite desolate. It's December of 1620. But there are some native villages that they find that are completely abandoned. And in those native villages are food stores. Mostly what crop? Yes, corn. Very good. Okay? So they're like, this is a gift from God. What happened to those natives? They died of disease. Okay? Because another group of English had been there sooner and had spread probably smallpox, and a whole tribe known as the Pawtuxet were completely wiped out, with the exception of just a handful survived. Questions about the Pilgrims up to this point? All right, cool. So the guy that was the captain of this venture was Miles Standish. They called him Captain Shrimp. He was mostly just like he was kind of like a John Smith. He had kind of all the right stuff for a military command, and he's going to end up becoming a pretty solid negotiator for the Pilgrims in the early days of the settlement of Plymouth. As previously mentioned, before leaving the ship, they agreed upon a system of law and order, all right? And it's going to create what we would call a covenant community, basically like a marriage between a group of people that believe one thing and a group of people that believe another, so they can survive and not kill each other. And then the other part of this is remaining loyal to England. But they bring something with them that is going to be replicated, something that we still do today, and something that had been around way before they came onto the scene. So, like, a good example here would be, can I see a show of hands of who would like to go on a field trip? Okay, it's unanimous. We just participated in what is called Athenian-style democracy. It's been around for a very long time. We just put something to what type of vote? Majority? Yeah, or we would call it a popular vote. A majority vote or a popular vote. We're going on a field trip. Huzzah. All right? We voted for it. They're going to bring that system of democracy to America, and not only do other people, I wouldn't say totally replicate the Mayflower Compact. They don't do that, but we start to see colonies form styles of constitutions moving forward. And by this point in time, there's only one other colony that's making it right now, and they're barely making it, and that's Jamestown. They're hanging on by a thread in 1620-21. In the first year, only 44 of the 102 survived. It was a brutal winter. Their first elected governor, was John Carver. But Carver will not remain governor for too long, because he'll ultimately die. Again, a lot of these folks are going to pass away. Eventually, they start to develop some peaceful relations with the local natives, the Wampanoag. There are numerous tribes in this region, and most of these tribes are connected to what large tribe that goes all the way down the east coast. Okay, that's a good guess. Powhatan were tied to this tribe too. Algonquian. Okay? The Algonquian. Good job. So there are three really important natives in this story. Chief Massasoit, Squanto, and Chief Samoset. Have we heard of any of these people before? If you've watched Charlie Brown Thanksgiving, you've heard about Squanto. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about each one of these people, so this will all make a little bit more sense. Massasoit was chief of what was left of the Wampanoag, and what was also left of Squanto's tribe, the Pawtuxet. Squanto was a Native American member of the Pawtuxet. When the English arrived on the shores of Cape Cod to explore and fish, he was kidnapped, sold to a group of Franciscan friars who then gave him his freedom. He winds up in England for a time and then somehow hitches a ride back to Cape Cod. So Squanto speaks English. What are the odds of that, right? And then we have Samoset, who's the chief of a tribe up in present-day Maine, who also speaks a little bit of English. So what they are able to do is provide the English not only the opportunity to communicate with Massasoit, but they're also going to be able to teach the English how to hunt and fish and grow crops and allow them to actually make it. Had these individuals not been in the picture, there's a pretty decent chance the Pilgrims would have never made it. All right? So over time, though, Samoset is out of the picture. Squanto and Massasoit's relationship deteriorates because Squanto is playing both sides. He comes over to the natives and says, hey, if you don't pay me tribute, I'm not going to communicate with the English. Goes over to the English, hey, if you don't pay me tribute, I'm not going to help you with the natives. Ultimately, this catches up with him. Massasoit wants a bounty on his head, and before he could be captured and executed by Massasoit, he dies of what they called Indian fever, which was probably what? Smallpox, okay? So when you think about the first Thanksgiving, you often think of Plymouth, right? But the first Thanksgiving actually happened where? Anybody know? Technically. The first celebration of the harvest, Thanksgiving, happened at Berkeley Plantation in Virginia prior to this one. But this is the one that we remember, right? Pilgrims of the Wampanoag, breaking bread, celebrating the bountiful harvest. But this is obviously part of the harvest that they're celebrating, but what they're also celebrating is an alliance. Because there's a really powerful tribe in the region of what is present-day Connecticut and Rhode Island, and that tribe's called the Narragansett. And the Narragansett want the Wampanoag to basically just be absorbed into their tribe, and Massasoit is trying to maintain their independence. This is something that I want you all to think about as we move into our next part of the lesson, because this is where I'm pumping the brakes today. We cannot look at the natives as a monolith. We have to remember that they have all types of drama going on before any English ever arrive. Because what other powerful tribe are they pushed up against in New York that is an enemy of theirs? The Iroquois. Okay? The Iroquois. Excellent. All right. So Bradford will become governor after the death of Carver. He's governor for 30 years, elected annually. That is absolutely nuts. To live 30 years, in America would have been remarkable. To govern for 30 years, I think he made it into his like his late 60s, early 70s.
Well, I was just thinking because you got
Yeah.
like he was probably like 20,
We can we'll have to double check it.
like 60, like he was last governor.
Now, ultimately, they start to make money off of furs, pelts, fish, and lumber. But in order to make money off of that and increase your trade, what do you need more of? Yep. And where is that? On more what? Land. So as more people show up and they encroach deeper and deeper into the territory, the relations with the natives are going to deteriorate. All right. Ultimately, Plymouth will merge in 1691 with Massachusetts Bay Colony, and that is where we'll get to next class. I'll be teaching you guys about Massachusetts Bay Colony. So, signing of the Mayflower Compact. We're also going to deal with, in our next lesson, the breakdown of the native relations, because the wars that they're going to fight against the natives in New England are going to totally eclipse what we talked about with the Anglo-Powhatan Wars. The deadliest native wars in the colonial period occurred up in New England. Yeah.
Do you know if that's a rendering or if that's like
Oh, yeah.
actual drawing?
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Great question. All right. So, that's it for me today.